and welcome to all our viewers.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Dr. Stephen Whitehead, who is an internationally renowned sociologist, researcher, writer on gender, sexuality, education for over 2 decades now, and originator of the concepts of total inclusivity and totally inclusive self love. His books have generated enormous media interest and reached millions across the world. Welcome, sir, to today's session.
Thank you. Nice to be here and talking to you. Society's changing dramatically, but I'd say part of the problem is that men are not changing. Women are changing. Why is it unreasonable for a woman to want to be independent?
Yeah.
Why is it unreasonable for a woman to want to have her own career, want to go to university?
Yeah.
Why is it unreasonable for a woman to decide whether or not she has children and how many children she has? It's not. It's entirely reasonable. Men have been making these decisions for themselves for centuries. Now it's women's turn. And women aren't going to give up on this power, on this agency, on this opportunity for choice. And I think many women, in many cases, a lot of women would be better off living solo lives than they will be living with a man, because most of the violence that takes place against women takes place in the home.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up in one line. Women are changing, but men are not changing. So all of this boils down to that. I mean, all the changes and AI going and people using AI as a, as an alternative to human. This is all, I feel, masculinity trying to cope in
That's
whatever
good.
way they can, but not
That's
able to do it. Yeah.
That's a good line. I shall use that. Masculinity trying to cope. Yeah, exactly. And that's so when a man buys a sex robot, he doesn't have to make an effort.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to learn how to be with a woman. He doesn't have to learn how to communicate. He can live wrapped up in his own vacuum, his own masculine vacuum, without any interference. He can replace the robot. He can give it a new wig. He can buy any number of robots. He doesn't have to try to be different, to be a more progressive man. He can fester in his own traditional masculinity, but he's going to fester alone, and he isn't going to be healthy. But that's the sad thing. But until men do change, that's the state that we're going to be in. I think men are changing. There's a progressive masculinity around the world, but it's still in the minority. It's not the majority of men. I know progressive masculine men in India, and there are a lot of them doing excellent work in this area of gender analysis and men and masculinities, but they're not. They are the minority. Most men in India, as in the rest of the world, don't have the emotional intelligence. They don't have the courage. They don't have the empathy. They don't have the desire to understand themselves. If they can't, the thing is about a man. I'll give you an example. When I did my PhD many, many years ago, one of the questions I asked of the men managers was, "How can you explain to me how being a man has affected your life as a manager? Can you explain to me how being a man has affected your life as a manager?" Out of 20 men, only one could even try to answer that question. They had no idea. You ask that question of a woman, you get instant responses.
Yeah.
Massive responses.
Yeah, she's facing it every now and then. Yeah.
You know, they switch them on and it never stops. Men, unless men become self-aware, they can't understand women. They don't understand themselves, so how are they going to understand women?
Yeah. Very well put. Yeah. Completely agree. Yeah.
It's sad, but I've been studying it now for 30 years. I predicted the backlash. I knew we were going to get a backlash against women, and we're going to get even worse backlash yet. You see what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan. There'll be other countries trying to do the same, I suspect. Saudi Arabia's in that area, parts of the Middle East. I don't know about India. I think India's got a very vocal female population now, but Pakistan possibly. So in Russia, I don't know. But you can't silence women and you can't force them to have babies. You can try, but it's not, that's not a world that we want to be looking towards. So my hope is that men change, and I think we've got to put pressure on men to change.
Yeah. Um, so how do you think the governments are going to cope with this? I mean, people stop procreating. Is this species going to go ahead, or is it coming to an end? Where are we headed, really? I mean,
Where is what?
where are we headed in the sense that is this even going? And also because this is something which has been observed across countries now, all over the world, which is showing you these trends. So it's not one particular government or one particular country trying to deal with it. So there must be some reasons which is like, which is leading to the universality of a situation like this.
Yeah, you're right.
And how
Uh,
the governments are going to deal with what do you think is coming up in the future? How?
well, when we look at governments, we're looking at men in power by and large. And unless those men are self-aware, liberal-minded, progressive, then they're not in the position to make any changes. It needs women in power. So that's the process. You need to stop electing men into power in India. And that's going to take time. I mean, it's happening in.
Also, in a country like
Oh,
India, this concept of internalized misogyny is very, very common, where you have equally misogynist women. I mean, I don't want to take names, but we all know the, crime rate in India, in cities and in states, which is led by females. So it's not really, that's what I'm saying. It's less of a male woman thing, man woman thing. Yes, I mean, broadly, sociologically, yes, but once you get deeper into it and you think about masculinity and femininity, and that's when you realize that this has got less to do with a man or a woman, because you have women who are completely a product of this patriarchal system, so they think
well,
that way. So
that is toxic femininity, and
mm,
and and my book that comes out next year, which I've just finished writing, looks at the way toxic femininity manifests itself in women's lives. And when women are aggressive towards other women, that is coming from this patriarchal context. So it's not coming from a women's power base. It's coming from a set of women who are trying to co-opt themselves into male ways of being.
yeah.
So it does the women no favor. I'll give you an example. Female genital mutilation. Why would any woman force another woman or female to undergo female genital mutilation? That is collaborating, being complicit in women's subservience, in women's oppression. Now, women are subservient many women are compliant and complicit in it, but that is an expression of toxic femininity. It's not helping these women. Part of the point is that the women need to move away from that way of being and embrace independent femininity, which is a way of being in the world which is far more inclusive, considerate, empathetic, less violent.
So I
Um,
think step
but,
one is to just educate yourself about and get more clarity as to what is femininity, masculinity, toxic.
sure.
It's all because it's all messed up in the heads of people. So
Well,
till they have
yeah,
the
it,
education.
you've got we've got to educate girls to be assertive and independent and speak for themselves and not copy men. We've got to train girls and educate girls not to be complicit in their own sexual objectification. And we've got to educate girls not to rely on men to make their lives perfect. And we've got to educate males to be empathetic, to be safe, to be non-violent, to be aware of and respectful towards females and respectful towards themselves. This, whether men can do it, comes back to an original question you made: is what is the future? It depends whether men can change, because women already have. So it depends whether we're going to see men change, and if so, in what way. We know men can kick back against it, against women's empowerment, but we also know many men are for it, and they're part of that process. And I'm one, and there's many millions of men like me. I'm not the only one. But in the long-term future, it's not getting focused too much on the women who are a problem, but we need to identify toxic femininity. That's for sure. That's why I've written this new book. And it's, let me, I haven't got it here. But toxic femininity is something that will become more prominent. Now, toxic femininity is not the same as toxic masculinity. Toxic femininity is a byproduct of toxic masculinity. If you didn't have toxic femininity, you wouldn't have toxic masculinity. You wouldn't have toxic femininity. One feeds off the other. Toxic femininity is when a woman believes she's worthless because a man tells her so. It's when a woman gets into a relationship that's oppressive, abusive, diminishing, and she thinks it's her fault. It's when a woman blames herself for the problems that men have given her in her life. That's toxic femininity. And it's when a woman, frustrated at all the circumstances of her life, takes it out on other women. That's why you have a problem with many mother-in-laws in India and other countries, traditional countries. The in-law women, they take it out on the next generation because it was taken out on them. And that's how it's gone back, generation after generation after generation. Now, one of the things I want to do in my new book is alert women to what they're doing. And it's based on 12 case studies of women who've gone through this, and some of them have come out of it. The answer in the book is self-love. That's the only way you're going to overcome that. Self-love, both for women and for men. Most men do not like themselves. They're trying to copy male models of behavior, whatever they've got in their head, and they don't meet up to it. They don't reach that model of achievement, and they hate themselves for it. Most men feel insecure, nervous, inadequate, shy. They realize that they're not what they pretend to be. And that is the failure of this sort of masculinity.
Yeah.
Women's problem is that they don't love themselves. They'll look for a man to love them. And what I say in the book is a woman with toxic femininity will say to herself, where is the man that's going to love me? A woman with independent femininity will say, I love me.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, it boils down to self-love and
Absolutely.
turning
If that's the one thing, you see, you and I can't change the world. I can have an impact in my writing. You can have an impact in your writing and research. But the biggest impact you're ever going to have in the world is changing yourself. And if you change yourself towards one of calmness, empathy, self-love for yourself, all aspects of yourself, what I call totally inclusive self-love, then that is the beginning of the changes that we're going to need to see in the world.
And very interestingly, that's also tapping into the inner feminine within you, which means,
That's right.
the more inclusive side of you rather than conquering and, trying to get over.
That's right. That's right. So not competition, not aggression, not kicking outwards. Yeah, you want to achieve and you want to be part of an achieving world, but you've got to protect yourself and you've got to look at yourself. You don't protect yourself by building bodyguards behind you and being aggressive and fighting. You can only do that through self-love. It's the only way.
Yeah. Again, in India, we see percentage of single women and men in urban India is higher than in the rural spaces, with women exceeding men in number. So within the cultural landscape of a diverse and dynamically evolving country like India, what do you think? Is this just for the privileged women who are, now who have the liberty to live in their own way? Because just taking my example, I'm 30, but I don't think of marriage. It's not even on the list right now because I am substantially privileged to be thinking in that way. But if we talk about the rural India, of course, numbers are not as high as in urban, yet they are changing. And I mean, similar trends are being observed, but not as much as the one in urban. So I'm only interested to see the way things are shifting now, maybe a few years from now. How would this sociologically impact a country like India, where even in the rural spaces, where all of this is basically identifying fluid gender roles is taboo in a country like India, and which is fine with like the urban section is still accepting of it, and that's why we see the changes. But it will be a huge shift if these if these things percolate to the rural sections as well. And I'm only interested to see what kind of change will it bring to a country like India on the whole. I mean, social.
Well, let's say you're 30 years old. In 20 years' time, you could be the Prime Minister of India if you chose to be so.
Hmm.
But there is a woman sat somewhere in India today who's gone one day going to lead India. And I hope that woman, whoever she is, wherever she is a feminist, or is at least concerned to have gender parity and is aware of the problems of patriarchy, male violence, and all the toxic stuff that comes with that sort of attitude with men. Now, if I was that woman, the first thing I would do, as far as the rural population is concerned, is to improve the education system in the rural schools. Because if you want to change women, you've got to change the education system. You can start with the schools, you can start in kindergarten, primary, through to secondary. There's no reason on earth why families in rural areas could not get an advanced education. And you can bring changes about by teaching about empowerment and equality and choice and opportunity and respect in schools. Doesn't matter where the school is. It can be in the middle of a rice field. We've got them in Thailand, or it can be in the city. You've got them in Bangkok. Women like you, some woman like you can bring that about, and probably a woman will bring it about. It'll only come through education, through self-awareness, and through an innate desire within the woman to have a better life. But an individual can learn to love themselves without having money in the pocket, without having a high-powered job, without having a fancy car, without having 10 or 20 bank accounts. Some of the wealthiest people on earth do not love themselves. Elon Musk is an example. Donald Trump's another one. You can be poor and you can be without resources, but if you love yourself, that is a way forward for empowering yourself. So if you educate the children, the girls especially, but also the boys in rural India to love themselves, care for themselves, self-awareness, self-respect, and inclusivity, you'll bring about change. Absolutely.
Really see that happening because I mean the way rural India is today. See, in India, self-love is still a luxury for people, most people. So those
Sure.
who are kind of sorted with their survivals can then think about something beyond that. And even as a yoga teacher here, that's what I observe in people. I mean, those who are kind of sorted with their lives can then sit down and think about meditating. But how can we go and tell this to somebody who is struggling with just, to make ends meet and to get
So
things? So,
suffering is okay. The point about suffering is not bad. We're all going to suffer in life. I don't know you, and you don't have to tell me anything, but I know you've gone through sufferings. Everybody does. We all do. We learn from it. It's part of the process of self-awareness, learning self-management, learning to be like other human beings. Suffering is not to be avoided. You're not going to avoid it. The women that I've interviewed for my book, not all of them were rich. Some of them went through great pain, real poverty, and still are doing. But they can find a way through. In the end, they've got to call on their own reserves. You can't, money in the bank's not going to solve it. You're going to have to work, you're going to have to do your jobs, you're going to have to bring children up. But no matter what the problem is, whether you're single or married, you have to love yourself.
Yes.
and it's not going to stop if you get money in your pocket.
But the thing is that, sir, the whole structure, the way society is structured around earning money itself, I mean, today
Mm.
it's changing. And in the urban sections, of course, it's different. A woman
Yeah,
can make a lot of money through her creative potentials, and she can actually capitalize on that and does not need to go through the conventional 9 to 5 job, which is making her do a certain thing and blocking all other, all the multidimensionality within her is blocked. That's not true for the privileged class. But when we look at
sure.
the lower sections of society, because their life is very masculine, the way they have to live their life, the structures around it, that's how we've built society. So even if they want to, and especially in the lower classes, you see the cases of abuse and all kinds of rapes and crimes is much higher.
Sure,
So
sure.
it's definitely a positive shift. I mean, in the near future, if it goes to that section, that's like the ideal thing, and I'll be happiest because it can also control the population of India. That's one thing, how it can work out. But yes, then we're looking at a complete shift in even, every kind of shift. It's not just about starts with gender, but the far-reaching implications are so much. I mean, from economics to the social reality, socio-political reality, everything will change around this. So,
Everything will change, and I can't tell you exactly how it's going to change. I know what the trajectories have been for the last 70 years, but I can't, in all honesty, tell you what they're going to be for the next 70 years. I know where we are now, and where we are now is a rise in female sense of independence, a new independent femininity, but also a pushback against this by those men who feel threatened by it. As I say, for me, education has to be the key intervention point. If you don't change the education system to encourage more independent thinking in children, to encourage more respect, empathy, emotional intelligence development in children, more critical thinking in children, then you're not going to get the social changes that you need.
and
It's
also, I think then the entire education system needs a revolution. I mean, the way it is in India is today actually just like I mean, India was not the same all along. Today it's the way because it's just after the British, once they left us, our education system has been designed in a certain way, which is not really how it used to be years and years back. So we were very very rich in the traditional arts and the way all our education was imparted. There was a concept of gurukulams where education was not limited to classrooms, but it used to happen in nature, and very, very, very free flowing and intuitive. So that is kind of, it's also, it's like a hangover from the West is what India is also suffering. That's another angle to that.
I have to say that's not going to go away. Let me tell you, I don't know if you heard of Harrow International Schools.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Well, Harrow International Schools first started in Bangkok. That was the first one. Then they opened up in Hong Kong, in China, South Korea. Harrow International Schools, it's actually a separate company, but it's the same brand from Harrow Private School in London. Harrow International Schools are now opening in India. And there's a whole generation, a new generation of international schools opening in India, and they will cater for the moneyed elite in India. And out of these international schools in India will be the next generation of leaders, male and female. Now, I have to tell you, if they're international schools following the Cambridge curriculum or the International Baccalaureate, they will be forced, required, not least by agencies like the Council of International Schools, to follow totally inclusive criteria. One of my co-authors on the book Becoming an International School, Angelina Howe, is a person who works for the CIS, going to international schools and encouraging total inclusivity. So let me say that there's a whole new elite of international schools emerging now as we speak in India that are going to cater for the next generation of well-off, highly educated, moneyed, inclusive-minded men and women. And that's unavoidable. That's happening around the world, but we're now seeing it kick off big time in India. So I think what we hope is that these young men and women now going through these schools, when they come into positions of power and authority, and they surely will, they follow a totally inclusive mindset because they've been taught it in the schools today. That's the one hope. And I don't know if it'll happen, but it's certainly not going to happen unless we try. That's one reason why I wrote these books, Total Inclusivity. It's an intervention, and education is the most important one. We need to get the children through these schools, and we need to get them to university, and we need to get them to be thinking and recognizing the inclusive character of themselves and of the society that we live and work in. You're not going to do away with poverty in India. That's not going to happen in any number of lifetimes. But you can, through education, empower women, empower females to think more agentically and to be more self-aware and self-assertive.
Now, another global trend is aligning with the rise in singletons, which is that of celibacy. Now, this is where it gets more interesting. The rise of VCs or voluntary celibates has been evident in Japan and South Korea for over a decade now. But now we are seeing it worldwide. Dr. Justin Lehmiller of Sex and Psychology podcast says that there is a long-term trend among people today in general for having less sex with few partners. Humans are increasingly less sexually active, with some foregoing sex altogether. So how do you correlate this rise in celibacy with collapsing of marriage as a social institution? I mean, as an expert in this field, you would consider the role of evolving gender identities. Do you consider the role of evolving gender identities as a threat to the propagation of the species? How do you look at it? Or do you celebrate the change?
I wouldn't personally be too bothered if the world population went down a lot. I think we've got, I think with 8 billion going up to maybe 9.5 billion before the end of the century, that's more than we can handle. The population, the environment's already under stress. So I think having fewer humans can't be a bad thing. So I'm not concerned about that. I am concerned. I think we've got. I didn't explore it I've not explored this in great depth, though I've written about relationships and sexuality in the past. We're seeing a decline in sexual relations. We're seeing a rise in celibacy, and we're also seeing a rise in something which I didn't talk about, and that's a rise in bisexuality. We're seeing many more women engage in bisexual relationships, or at least educated women, middle-class women are more open. They've got a more fluid orientation towards same-sex relationships, which men don't have. So, for example, recent research in the USA suggests that women are almost 3 times more likely than men to identify as bisexual or orientated towards same-sex intimacy. So there's a decrease in the number of women who are only attracted to men. So sexuality is a funny thing. I believe that sexuality is largely biological. We are born straight, bi, whatever, but there's also a certain element of fluidity. And what we're seeing is that independent femininity accompanies a more fluid interpretation and an expression of sexuality, which it doesn't with men. Most men who have toxic masculinity, the worst thing you can call that man is gay or queer. And that would undermine his sense of self very quickly. With women, it doesn't. So there's a number of things here. There's a celibacy. There's a rise in bisexuality with women. There's a division in political orientations between men and women, certainly with Generation X. Decline in marriage, rise in divorce, decline in birth rates. They're all pointing in one direction, which is women striving forward with a more progressive expression of self, which includes a more expressive and fluid interpretation of their sexual relationships. But men who are still, I think a lot of men are just absorbed now watching porn. They'd rather watch porn and have a sex robot than they would get into a relationship with a real woman. I think that's probably the direction we're going in. That's not all men, for sure, but it's a lot. And I think that's not going to help the species. It's not going to help men learn.